You have perhaps been to a wedding. The service is over, the cocktails are wrapping up, and people are making their way to that inevitable chart which tells them who they've been seated with for the reception. In modern Canadian life, we don't face so many opportunities where relative importance is measured by distance to a certain table, but this comes pretty close. For the introverts among us, of whom I count myself, approaching that chart is the most angst-filled part of the evening and often takes some form of a prayer of, "Dear God, who am I making small talk with tonight?" Recently, I was invited to officiate at the wedding of former staff member Kylie Kinnan. It happened in Los Angeles. It was in this amazing backyard of a friend of a friend. The service was over. I'd kind of done my priest part. The pre-dinner cocktails were wrapping up. But then there was the wild card. There was no seating chart. It was open seating, and you could sit wherever it was that you wanted. In a considered move, I sat near the margaritas. Jesus was once invited to a dinner party of a religious professional, one of the leaders of the Pharisees. And people were watching him closely, as they often did, not to learn, but to try to trip him up. And Jesus couldn't help but notice how guest after guest of the dinner party came and sat themselves in the choice, luxurious seats. And so he told them a parable. Now, I like to think of a parable kind of like a smooth stone. And it's not something thrown at you, but alongside you. And what Jesus does is he takes these parables and he throws them kind of alongside our reality. And for those that can notice them, we're invited to kind of trace the arc of it and find ourselves at the top or the bottom or somewhere in between. Jesus says, "For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." Jesus' parable invites us in our imaginations to seat ourselves at the lowest place. Perhaps in this wedding banquet analogy, to seat ourselves near the door where the clanging kitchen is there and the waitstaff are bringing back the trays of dirty dishes. Or by the back door where the cigarette smoke wafts in from those on break. Or maybe near the washrooms with their sickly sweet automated fragrance. Of course, where you and I decide to sit isn't just a geographical decision, but also a social one. For to seat oneself at the lowest place is also to put our lot in with those who are seated there. Maybe it's the kids' table, or with the estranged cousin or the uncle who drinks too much. In my experience, the lowest place is often where the most interesting stories emerge from. Another way for us to think about lowest is simply ordinary or lowly. And that may be where you and I find ourselves today. After 2.5 years of pandemic, I think the temptation is strong to flee ordinary. Someone give me a red button to press to eject me from the humdrum of dishes and screaming kids or the boredom of my life to someplace different. For haven't we been kind of living lowly and ordinary for quite enough time? For some of us, that's meant pulling on a barely presentable top half of our wardrobe for the Zoom call, knowing it could just be PJs underneath. For others, trying to squeeze a full-time job in between full-time online school for the kids. And for others of us, ordinary or humbling has looked like being confined to the single room of our retirement residence again because of another outbreak on the B wing. These specific things have been the humbling or humiliating circumstances of the pandemic, and I think there's a temptation to try to leave them behind as quickly as possible, and maybe we can all just forget about it. Except for Jesus' final words. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. It feels important for me to say that I speak to you as one with privilege because of the color of my skin and my gender and my education, among many factors. I might have the choice of whether to sit in a high place or a low place. But what of our friends and siblings who have no choice, who've only ever been seated at the lowest place without any say in the matter? That's a sermon for another day. But let me just say that Jesus told a parable about that too, where he instructed his disciples to go into the alleyways and the byways and the hidden places and to invite everyone they could find to another wedding banquet, and to let everyone know that they were an invited guest and a significant subject in the reign of God. What about for those of us who have the choice of whether to humble ourselves? I need to say that it's not a strategy. It won't work as a means of manipulating God to our own ends, and I know because I've tried it. God, I'll do the humble thing for a while, but then you'll see and you'll exalt me for doing it, and then things are going to be twice as good as before. You can especially catch people in the spiritual life doing this because they think, I'm putting my tokens in the religious jar, something good has got to come out the other end. But as a seminary professor of mine once said, the cross is not a recipe for resurrection. That is, Jesus being in a place of death, it didn't trigger some immutable law that required God to resurrect him. Rather, what the cross was for Jesus, and as our humble circumstances may be for us, is a place of presence. An invitation to trust in someone bigger than our present circumstances, however we may dislike them. To trust the one who, in his last words to his friends, said, "For lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age." It's the fall. We've got our routines that are coming. For some of us, we've got our resolutions. And you and I don't need to leave our present humble circumstances in order to be in God's presence. And we don't need to try to escape those circumstances either, as tempting as that may be. For in this parable, Jesus has lobbed, in parallel to our reality, this notion that precisely in the lowest ordinary place is the place that we have to seat ourselves. And here, and not someplace else, is the place of God's resurrection. May Christ give us the patience to see God at work in the hiddenness of our ordinary lives. Amen.